At Thanksgiving dinner, my father looked me straight in the eye and laid down the family law of, "Your job is to work while your sister enjoys life. If you have a problem, there is the door." I stood up, dropped the keys, and said, "Fine. I will leave, and you can start paying your bill." Simple as that. For years, I had been the invisible engine of the family business. My name is Elena. At 30 years old, I was not a daughter. I was the invisible engine of the family business. I was the steady one, the girl who could lift what was heavy, fix what was broken, and keep the boutique greenhouse breathing when no one else bothered to try. I grew up in the shadow of that glass greenhouse on the outskirts of Portland. From the outside, it always looked warm, a jewel box of humid tropical life. Especially against the backdrop of the gray Pacific Northwest winter. But when you were the one working inside it, the damp chill of the concrete floor always seeped into your bones. While other kids spent their weekends biking around their neighborhoods, I was hauling 50-pound soil bags twice my weight, kneeling in the perpetually damp earth with numb fingers. My father, Gregory, called it building character. I simply called it my childhood. My sister, Chloe, never touched the dirt. She floated through life like a guest of honor, existing only in the warmed, brightly lit rooms. I had private dance lessons, cashmere sweaters, soft hands that never once lifted a crate or wrestled with a stubborn hose. My parents consistently murmured that she had potential, a delicate talent that needed cultivation. I often felt that the rest of us, myself included, were just scaffolding built to hold up her eventual success. I remember one specific Saturday afternoon. I was outside, pulling weeds from the new perennial beds, shivering slightly as mud splashed onto my heavy work boots. The sound of rain was a constant drumming. Through the humid glass of the attached sunroom, I could see Chloe practicing her contemporary dance routine. She was bathed in the controlled heat of the room, turning gracefully, her form admired by my mother, Linda, who sat watching with a small, contented smile. I stood there, watching the easy flow of love and attention toward Chloe, and wondered why it came so effortlessly to her, and yet never seemed to reach me, no matter how much effort I expended on the business. As adults, this dynamic only intensified. Chloe was cushioned, supported, and endlessly praised for the smallest efforts she made in her pursuit of a career she likely would never achieve. I, meanwhile, became the entirely invisible system running beneath everything. I managed inventory, checked the increasingly complex accounts, handled all the supplier bills, and took the late-night repair calls no one else knew how to troubleshoot. My father would pat my shoulder like I was a highly dependable machine. My mother would murmur that I was strong, which I realized was simply her polite way of saying that I could survive their neglect without fracturing. The cold, simple truth was this: I kept the family afloat because no one else would or could. I kept hoping that if I pushed through just one more crisis, if I saved them just one more time, they would finally look past the labor and see me as their daughter. So when we all sat down at that Thanksgiving table, the centerpiece of the year, I felt a flicker of that foolish hope. The candles were lit, the turkey steamed gently, and the room was filled with the scents of spices and wood smoke. Everything that should have felt safe and traditional. Maybe, I thought, the years of carrying their entire world would finally count for something tonight. Maybe they would offer a genuine word of thanks, a real acknowledgement. But the silence between us had been built long before that night. It was an architecture of unspoken agreements and resentment. As I felt my father shift in his chair, leaning back with that familiar air of bored authority, I realized this wasn't going to be a crack in the relationship. This was the moment the full, ugly truth of it would be exposed. I watched my mother's eyes drop to her plate, confirming her complicity. Chloe, sitting across from me, twirled her wine glass slowly, already anticipating a show. I just waited for the words that would inevitably confirm my deepest fears. The turkey steam rose between us, a hazy curtain momentarily, separating the family as I waited for the inevitable. I felt the shift, the way Gregory leaned back in his chair, trying to appear utterly casual, like he was about to comment on the salt shaker. And then it landed, sharp and casual, every syllable an accusation. Your job is to work while your sister enjoys life. For a second, the sound of my blood rushing was louder than the quiet murmur of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I thought I had misheard him, that the tension had simply warped a simple sentence. I glanced around the table, desperately searching for a flicker of confusion or even regret on any face. But Gregory did not blink. He meant it. Every sacrifice, every late night, every financial bailout was reduced to this single, brutal job description. Linda, my mother, pressed her damp napkin into her lap and stared fiercely at her plate. She did not flinch, which was her unique way of expressing total agreement with something cruel, while simultaneously avoiding the responsibility of having said it herself. Chloe sat straighter, smoothing the expensive fabric of her dress across her knees, looking pleased. She looked like a queen whose court had finally affirmed the hierarchy in writing. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady the earthquake that had just started in my chest. Dad, that is not an agreement we ever made, or a fair arrangement. He cut me off instantly with a lazy wave of his hand, not even bothering to look directly at me. If you have a problem, there is the door. There it was. The final line. It did not just bruise my spirit, it severed it entirely. 10 years of effort. Every bill I had quietly handled, every crisis I had solved, every moment I carried what they dropped, all dismissed with a phrase so clean and unangry that it sounded rehearsed. It sounded familiar. Like something he had been waiting years to use the day. I finally questioned the arrangement. My fork clinked against the plate. The sound was surprisingly loud in the sudden, deep silence. No one moved to pick it up. I looked from Gregory, who was rigid and unbothered, to Linda, who was small and silent, and finally to Chloe, who was almost smiling, basking in the spoken confirmation of her favored status. The room suddenly felt too tight, too loud, too bright. In that instant, I understood that I was not a daughter. I was not a partner. I was not family. I was infrastructure, replaceable, and expected to remain silent. The Portland rain intensified outside, hammering against the greenhouse windows. A rhythm I knew intimately from years of working late, after everyone else had gone to bed. Gregory's words echoed with each strike. Work, sister, door. Something inside me, a quiet, long-suppressed mechanism, snapped into sharp, cold clarity. It was not rage that took over, though a deep well of anger simmered below the surface. It was recognition. This was not a misunderstanding to be repaired. It was the fundamental blueprint of their lives. And I was just the material they had been exploiting. If this was the truth, then I did not have to keep pretending we were something we were not. I pushed my heavy dining chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Every face at that turned toward me, not with concern, but with blatant annoyance, as if I were interrupting a pleasant evening. Fine, I said, my voice level and steady, lacking the tremor I expected. I will leave. My father's jaw twitched. My mother's eyes widened. Chloe froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips. They finally understood what those words meant. But they had never once entertained the possibility that I would have the spine to say them. I continued, letting the words hang in the air. Weighted with the years of unpaid debt and responsibility. And you can start paying your bill. I reached for the key ring clipped to my belt. It was heavy. Warm from my body heat, filled with the weight of years. Keys to the storage rooms, to the delivery vans, to the inventory locks, and to the cabinets containing the specific tools no one else knew how to use. I unclipped the entire ring, held the solid weight of the metal for a single heartbeat, recognizing the years of my life it represented. Then, I dropped them onto the mahogany table. The sound was not loud, but it cut through the room like cold metal slicing fabric. No one moved to touch them. They just stared at the scattered keys, as if they were live grenades. I walked toward the back door, that opened directly into the largest greenhouse. The place where I had spent more hours than I had ever spent in my own bed. I pushed the door open, and a blast of winter rain and freezing air swept into the warm room, scattering napkins and instantly blowing out 2 candles on the table. Linda gasped softly. Gregory cursed under his breath. Chloe whined that her hair was getting damp. I did not look back. I stepped out into the storm, letting the rain soak straight through my coat as I crossed the path toward my car. I did not run. Running would have implied fear. And fear was the one thing that I felt loosening its grip with every step I took away from that dinner table. I was walking through the door they had offered me. And I was doing it completely. Inside the car, the world felt muted. The foggy windows and the steady, low hum of the engine created a small pocket of silence. I gripped the steering wheel, anchoring the realization that this was the absolute last time I would ever carry their burdens. The simple act of driving away felt like a quiet, profound relief mixed with the pain of an old wound finally being cauterized. I was driving toward my studio apartment. I poured toward the life I had kept separate, and toward the cold reality of what I knew I had to discover next. 40 minutes after leaving the Thanksgiving table, I unlocked the door to my studio apartment. The drive had been long and silent, giving me time to feel the relief and the acute pain of finality. Warm, quiet air greeted me, scented faintly with potting soil and the bright citrus of the lemon oil I used on my reclaimed wood shelving. This was my sanctuary, the place they never saw. My own plants, my real plants, were thriving. They were green, lush, and climbing the exposed brick in patterns that felt like absolute freedom. I slipped off my wet coat and moved straight to my small, utilitarian desk. My laptop glowed to life, reflecting the leaves around it, and I felt my fingers move with the automatic precision of someone performing a necessary, final chore. I was methodical. I knew exactly what strings I needed to cut. I began by systematically canceling all recurring payments tied to the nursery that ran through my personal accounts. Next, I revoked shared access to the main business accounts, where I was technically listed as the operations manager, not the owner. I deleted my authorization from the vendor portals and delivery schedules I had managed for years. Each click of the mouse was a deliberate breath I had not allowed myself to take in years. It was the sound of a silent machine finally powering down. It took over an hour, but when I was done, I felt a strange, cold peace. The family business was now entirely disconnected from the only person who understood its complex financial web. I had cut the wires, leaving the whole operation dangling by its own neglect. Then, I opened the folder I had been avoiding. This was not about the business. This was personal, and it was the necessary confirmation of the betrayal. Inside was the documentation for the account my grandmother had set up for me. It was a substantial sum, meant for Elena's future. Something that had promised independence and security. The balance read 0. The account had been completely drained years ago. The withdrawal form was crisp, filed under a date from 3 years past. My signature was there, or rather, a forgery of it. The betrayal hit me with a coldness that went deeper than the rain. I did not feel the heat of rage, but a cold, clinical clarity. I was not just neglected, I was stolen from. I recognized the script. My mother, Linda, had a distinctive handwriting, a delicate, looping cursive that curled at the edges, almost as if she were trying to make even her deception look polite and beautiful. The signature on the document, the one that released $150,000, belonged to Linda. They had not just used my labor. They had stolen the foundation my grandmother had left for my independence, the money meant for my future, and funneled it directly into maintaining Chloe's expensive, cushioned lifestyle. The withdrawal date correlated exactly with the time Chloe had moved into her downtown apartment. I closed the folder gently, almost tenderly. The way one might close the eyes of someone you had finally stopped hoping would wake up different. They had wanted me to walk out the door, and now, finally, I was walking out with all the facts. They had no idea what it truly meant when the person holding up the entire house finally let go. Especially when that person knew the darkest secrets of the foundation. I took the image of the forged signature and uploaded it to a secured drive. This piece of paper was not just evidence of theft. It was the blueprint of their character, the ultimate proof that the transactional nature of our relationship went far beyond my professional labor. It was a cold, complete severance. I stood there for a long time, looking at the city lights filtered through the rain-streaked window. I had no doubt about what would come next. Their confusion, their irritation, and their eventual entitled certainty that I would crawl back because that was my assigned role. But now, they would be met not with compliance, but with consequence. The foundation was gone, and the collapse was imminent. I knew exactly what I was waiting for once the evidence of the forgery was secured. I did not hear a single word from them for almost a full day after leaving the keys. The silence was not peaceful. It was expectant, like the tense pause before a glass hits the floor and shatters. I could practically feel the wheels of my father's entitlement, turning first confusion, then irritation, and finally, the absolute certainty that I would eventually come crawling back, because that was the role I had been assigned since childhood. During that silent day, I focused on my new reality. I went into the landscape architecture firm where I had recently taken an entry-level design role. I met Marcus, the principal partner, for the first time face-to-face. He was in his late 40s, precise and fair, and he treated me immediately as a capable professional whose input was genuinely valued. We discussed structural load requirements for a potential rooftop garden project, and for the first time in years, my technical knowledge was praised as an asset, not just exploited as a convenience. On the morning of the second day, the silence broke exactly as predicted. The messages started quietly at first, then built into a torrent. The first was from Gregory. Zone 3 irrigation is not firing. Get over here and fix it immediately. He was trying for authority, but the panic was audible in the text, despite his aggressive formatting. A few minutes later, another followed. Inventory is dropping, Elena. This is thousands of dollars. Stop being dramatic. He believed that by quantifying the cost, he could trigger my old sense of responsibility. Then came the message from Chloe, the one that always cut the deepest because it framed her selfishness as my failing. Mom is crying. My audition is ruined because of this negative energy. Can you just handle it? Negative energy. That was what she called 2 decades of unpaid labor, constant neglect, and recently discovered financial theft. I muted the notifications on my phone, setting it face down on my desk. My hands, which were steadying a large architectural drawing of a proposed water feature, did not tremble. My breathing was even. They could rattle the greenhouse all they wanted, but they no longer had access to the foundation. I continued working with Marcus, designing the placement of high-density planting boxes. He spoke about patience and intention, values I realized I had only ever applied to my family's business, never to my own life. He had no idea the chaotic storm I was intentionally allowing to rage outside my new, quiet harbor. By noon, the buzzing stopped entirely. For a brief, optimistic moment, I allowed myself to imagine they had understood the message, that I was gone and my exit was permanent. But entitlement does not die quietly, it mutates. They were quiet not because they understood, but because they were regrouping, moving from demanding my labor, back to demanding my presence and my submission. They believed that if they couldn't shame me back, they could drag me back. I knew their playbook well enough to anticipate the next move. That evening, I ate dinner alone in my small studio, the air scented with the blooming jasmine I was nursing on the windowsill. The jasmine required gentle attention and consistent effort, a contrast to the endless, unrewarded sacrifice the greenhouse had demanded. I knew tomorrow would bring the confrontation. I mentally rehearsed my words, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I was done being reactive. Tomorrow, I would deliver the consequence. The next morning, I was in a meeting with Marcus and 2 senior designers, reviewing structural load requirements for the heavy planting materials. My focus was absolute, centered on the complex calculations of soil density and water weight. Then, the receptionist's voice cut sharply through the intercom system. "Elena, your parents are here. They say it is urgent." The room fell absolutely still. My stomach did not drop the way it once would have when they summoned me. Instead, something inside me braced, like stepping into cold water on purpose. I offered a brief, calm apology to Marcus and the partners. "I will handle this," I said, before stepping into the hallway. The lobby of the firm was modern and bright, all soaring glass, polished concrete, and stark winter light. And in the very center of it stood Gregory and Linda, looking smaller and far more frayed than I had ever seen them. Their clothes were wrinkled, their eyes frantic with a fear that was clearly self-centered, not born of remorse. Linda clutched her purse like it was a fragile life raft. "Elena," Gregory boomed, attempting to regain his old authority. But his voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. "This has gone on long enough. You need to come home and fix what you broke." I stopped several feet away, letting the physical distance between us speak volumes. I kept my shoulders straight and my expression neutral, adopting the professional armor I had built since leaving the greenhouse. The distance felt necessary, a buffer against their entitled chaos. "I did not break anything," I said quietly, ensuring my voice carried enough for the receptionist, who was pretending very hard not to listen. "I just stopped holding everything together." Gregory took a stiff step closer, his eyes darting to the glass walls surrounding us, as if he expected a larger audience to validate his claim. "We have nowhere to go. The landlord wants payment." And he said the account bounced. "That is not my problem," I answered, the phrase feeling heavy and correct on my tongue. "You told me I was not family, just labor. Remember the door you offered me?" I walked through it. His face struggled to process this reversal. Confusion quickly turned to aggression. "Do not twist my words. We just meant that you are the responsible one." "I am not twisting anything." I reached into the folder I held tucked under my arm. The movement was deliberate, signaling the shift in the conversation from emotional appeal to cold transaction. I pulled out the photograph of the withdrawal document. I held it up, not moving closer, letting the forged signature speak for itself. The moment Gregory recognized the familiar lines of his wife's lie, his shoulders completely caved. It was as if the undeniable truth had hit him physically. Linda made a small, choking sound. "Elena, please. You do not understand. We needed the money. Chloe needed a chance. You stole from me," I stated, my voice steady, unyielding. "From a fund my grandmother left for my future. You did not take a loan. You did not ask. You forged my name to pay for an apartment Chloe could not afford." Chloe was physically absent, but her shadow hung heavy in the bright, silent air of the lobby, a silent witness to the years of misplaced priority. My mother's hands trembled where they gripped her purse. "We were going to put it back," she whispered, desperate. "You had 3 years." I replied, the fact cutting cleanly through her defense. You did not put back a single dollar. Gregory tried to recover his last scrap of his old authority. Leaning forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. You would not dare report this. We are your parents. The sentence, meant to remind me of duty and obligation, instead simply revealed his final illusion, that biology granted him immunity from consequence. I took one single, slow step forward, close enough for him to see the complete detachment in my eyes. Nothing about me resembled the daughter he had once commanded. I was the person standing in the light, holding the evidence. I already filed the report with the Financial Crimes Division, I said, delivering the sentence with absolute, quiet certainty. Gregory staggered backward, momentarily speechless, as if I had struck him across the face. Elena, no. We could go to jail. The panic was absolute. Transforming his bluster into utter fear. He had been so convinced that my biology guaranteed his immunity that the concept of accountability rendered him helpless. You will not, I said. I was not there to destroy them completely, only to ensure justice and freedom for myself. Not if you leave Portland today and start taking responsibility for your own lives. I laid out the terms, which were not a demand for labor, but a demand for self-reliance. I have already arranged restitution through the sale of the nursery assets. It will cover part of the debt. And that arrangement is predicated on your immediate departure from the city. Linda made a gasping sound, her face pale. We cannot just leave. Where would we go? That, I replied, my voice completely devoid of the warmth or pity she craved, is for you to figure out. Just like I always had to figure out everything else. The receptionist was now hovering nearby, her eyes wide. Pretending to organize paperwork, but clearly listening to every word of the family's meltdown. Gregory's face crumpled. It was not the look of remorse, which requires empathy, but pure, unadulterated fear of consequence. He whispered hoarsely. We are your family. That ended the night you told me the door was my only option, I replied. All I am doing now is walking through it completely and taking the infrastructure with me. I nodded discreetly toward the firm's security guard, who had been waiting patiently near the elevators. He understood the silent signal. You will need to go now, I instructed them. Linda reached out her hand, as if touching the sleeve of my professional coat could somehow undo the past, but I stepped back immediately, refusing the physical contact. I am done being the soil you grow your comfort in, I told her, finally verbalizing the core truth of our relationship. If you want a life, you must build it yourselves. The security guard approached them. Gregory was stiff and silent, defeated by the legal threat he had manufactured. Linda was sobbing softly, clutching her purse to her chest. The security guard placed a steady hand near Gregory's elbow, guiding them firmly toward the lobby's sliding glass doors. As the doors hissed shut behind them, sealing them out into the winter day, I watched them go. For the first time in my life, watching them leave did not hurt. There was no grief, no regret, no doubt. It felt like the heavy greenhouse door, swinging closed on a storm. I was no longer required to survive. The intense relief was immediate and overwhelming. The physical confrontation had drained me, but the emotional cost of their presence was finally zero. I walked back toward the elevator, leaving them to face the consequences that had been years in the making. The power dynamic, which had defined my life for 3 decades, had been irrevocably reversed. I had chosen justice over loyalty, and in doing so, I had chosen myself. Hours later, after the bright lobby had emptied, and the winter sun had dipped behind the skyline, I returned to my desk. My colleagues did not ask questions. Marcus simply nodded, acknowledging the professionalism of the situation, and then gave me space. The kind of unquestioning, quiet respect my family had never once offered. I opened my laptop. But not out of habit. I opened it out of intention. My future was no longer tied to theirs, no more payments, no more rescues. and no more years lost to a loyalty that flowed only in one direction. In the weeks that followed, the fallout settled into place exactly the way it always should have. According to reality, not fantasy. Without my income, my technical management, and my quiet negotiation of bills, the nursery could not survive a single comprehensive audit. The land was sold off quickly to cover the overwhelming debt and to complete the restitution I had arranged to cover the stolen portion of my grandmother's fund. The famous greenhouse glass, the very structure that had sheltered their entitlement, was sold to another grower outside the city. For the first time in decades, Gregory and Linda had to live as people, not as monarchs of a small, fragile kingdom I had built for them. They had to face the mundane, crushing reality of paying for their own existence. I received updates through Marcus, who handled the final sale of the nursery assets, and through subtle checks on public records. Gregory found part-time work as a night attendant at a warehouse on the industrial side of Portland. The man who had once commanded me to manage thousands of dollars of inventory was now checking truck manifests for minimum wage. Linda started helping at a local co-op market on weekends, sorting produce with the same delicate hands that had once forged my signature. The sight of her doing honest, uncompensated labor felt like the definitive end of her illusion of privilege. Chloe moved north, I sharing a cramped apartment with roommates while juggling shifts between retail work and her auditions. None of this was cruel. It was simply the natural consequence of having built a life entirely on someone else's stability. I did not celebrate their struggle, but I absolutely did not save them either. My energy, which used to be devoted to bailing them out, was now channeled into a place that was better for my own soul. I poured my attention into the new firm and, more importantly, into the one thing I had purchased just 2 weeks after the confrontation. 5 acres of raw land outside the city. It was wild, uneven, and overgrown, but it was mine, purchased with a down payment from the first significant paycheck of my new, legitimate career. I drove out there often during that period, standing in the misted air and feeling the weight of the land under my boots. I had not destroyed their world. I had simply stepped out of it and watched it collapse under the weight of its own long, festering neglect. The weight I had carried was gone, replaced by the profound peace of knowing that every single effort I made now belonged only to me. My family's kingdom had fallen, and I was finally free to cultivate my own. The fallout had settled into place, finally confirming the harsh, objective reality I had longed for. I had found my own space, both professionally and geographically. My 5 acres of raw land lay quiet and still beneath the cold Portland sky, waiting. The first morning I walked the entire perimeter of that land, the mist rising from the undisturbed soil, and clinging to the cedar trees, I knelt down. I pressed my palms into the damp earth, feeling the rough texture of the soil. It was wild, stubborn, and completely mine. In that moment, I felt something I had not felt since I was a child, a beginning, not an obligation. I started spending every free weekend out there, slowly clearing brush, drawing up plans and learning the unique demands of the terrain. I realized that this new growth felt nothing like the life I had left behind. The greenhouse had demanded instant sacrifice, constant effort, and endless, uncompensated labor. This land asked for patience, intention, and honesty. I was not fighting it, I was collaborating with it. My focus now was on building something real. I had plans to establish my own specialty nursery, rooted in ethical sourcing and sustainable practice, often collaborating with Marcus's firm on large-scale installations. My hands were finally planting seeds that would grow into my own future, not subsidize theirs. I often return to that land now, watching the slow, certain push of the first shoots through the soil. The land is teaching me that growth does not have to be painful to be true. It just needs to be tended with integrity. In the quiet of my new life, reflecting on the Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything, I realized the profound simplicity of my action. I had not sought revenge, nor did I need to. I had simply stepped out of a structure that was reliant on my presence. Their choices had shaped their path. My choice had opened a new one. I am Elena. No longer the strong one, but the woman who chose freedom. My worth is not measured by the weight I can lift, but by the boundaries I keep. And in the quiet certainty of my own future, standing on my own honest soil, I can finally say the words that changed everything, the words that meant I would never look back. Simple as that.